Good evening, cousins. So, if you think last night our conversation got deep, woo, today is about to get even deeper, cousins. Tonight, I want to tell you my story, okay? And it's a story that I honestly have been avoiding for a long time. A few years ago, I pulled into my office parking lot and I couldn't get out of my car. The strange thing was that if you were there, nothing looked wrong. Okay? My staff were inside, the clients were inside, the transportation routes were running, the day program was open, my residential homes were all staffed. So from the outside, everything looked successful, but I couldn't get out of the car. I was under suspension at this time. I was under suspension. It was following an audit, okay? And I could continue serving my existing clients, but I couldn't accept any new clients while this suspension was going on, and they had to figure out what they would, you know, decide to do with my agency. So I sat in a car feeling hopeless. Because I was responsible for payroll, I was responsible for buildings, I was responsible for vehicles, I was responsible for insurance, I was responsible for staff. And the people who depended on me needed this job. And I'm sure you know exactly what that means. When I was in that car, I felt heaviness. What if this is it? I felt uncertainty. What will I do? My employees were inside. The employees who stood beside me before I could even offer them health benefits. The employees who used their own vehicles when transportation bans were broken down. My employees. What if I have to tell them we are closing? What if this is their last paycheck? The anxiety held me captive in the car. What's funny is the car was a Range Rover that I had brought as a gift. I bought it as a gift for myself, okay? I wanted it to represent my hard work because I might be like a lot of you. I struggled to buy myself nice things. And so when I went to get a car, I looked at the Range Rover and I loved it. And I told myself, you have to do something for you. You deserve it. So I got the Range Rover. Even though I had to put down a nice down payment on it, I told myself I was still going to get it. And it felt good, Sean, when I got that Range Rover. It was a reminder of everything that I built. But months later, the Range Rover was my prison. I couldn't get out of the car. I remember calling a friend and I said to her, I'm here. I made it here, but I can't get out of the car. I can't get out of the car. I had made the decision before I left home. I was going to push through today. I was going to smile. I was going to walk inside. I was going to be positive because they needed to see their leader strong and confident. They needed to know we will get through this together. But cousins, hear me when I say this. Your organization has to be stronger than your emotions. Your organization has to be stronger than your presence because there are going to be days when the leader is hurting too. This captivity didn't make sense at the time. If this suspension had happened earlier, I would have understood it. But 6 months before this, something had finally clicked for me. I had gone through a scheduled audit at that time. And for the first time, I understood what I was missing. The issue was not knowledge. The issue was just implementation. So I built the internal compliance system. I hired a compliance officer. I added the oversight to the homes. I hired different residential supervisor. I strengthened the accountability. For the first time, I felt like I finally understood the problem. I finally understood the difference between knowing a rule and created a system to make sure that that rule was implemented. Which is why sitting in that Range Rover, frozen today, didn't make sense. But that's the thing about delayed implementation. Sometimes the change is right. You did it. You put the things in order, but they came too late. And that's what scared me most. Not that I didn't know better, not that I didn't care, but that I finally understood the problem after the consequences had already started. On the other side of that door, I looked like I was winning. We had 7 full transportation routes. We had a day program serving nearly 30 individuals. We supported people across all different services, HPC, non-medical transportation, day program, vocational habilitation program. We had even absorbed additional individuals after another provider unexpectedly closed. We took on more responsibility, more staff, more people who needed support. The organization was on pace to do 3.5 million that year. But inside that car, I was realizing growth had hidden problems that I should have addressed years earlier. I didn't delay implementation because I didn't care. The delay was just supposed to be until tomorrow because it was always on a day I was busy surviving. But then when tomorrow came, I was solving the next problem. I was putting out the next fire. I was carrying the next burden. And somewhere along the way, I started believing that that's what leadership was. I would eventually lose my agency, closing mid-year at roughly 1.8 million instead of the 3.5 million that we were projected to reach. And what people don't seem to talk about is what happened after. Because eventually I had to go home. And though I was sad, though I was broken, though I was lost, I couldn't show my kids that I was depressed because kids don't stop needing their mom just because mom is hurting. Just like the agency still needed their leader when things were happening, they needed me too. So I smiled. I cooked dinner. I showed up. I drove them to practice. I asked about their day. And then when everybody went to bed, it was just me and this blue couch. Not the comfortable couch in the family living room, and not even the couch off of my master suite. This was the couch that wasn't in one of these enjoyable places. Not the spaces I built to enjoy the success I thought I had earned. This blue couch was a small couch upstairs. The one that was just for decor in the fancy living room. The room that nobody was supposed to sit in. It was uncomfortable. But every night, there I was. Alone. Not watching TV. Not relaxing. Not resting. Just sitting. Just thinking. Just staring. Trying to make sense of what happened. And I kept asking myself the same question. How did I end up on this couch? I built the business from my car. I left a $17 an hour job. I built something people said couldn't be done. And I was just sitting on a couch wondering if I could lose my house. And here's the thing. I thought I had lost the business. But what I eventually realized was I was grieving an identity. Who am I now? The money was the last thing I lost. I lost certainty. I lost confidence. I lost identity. Who am I now? Because for years, my value had been tied to being needed, the one who solved it, the one who carried it, the one who figured it out. So when the agency closed, it felt like I lost more than the business. I lost me. The person who saved everybody. I hired 6 of my 7 siblings, my nephew, my mom, my family, people I loved. I was the one people depended on. So if I couldn't save me, if I couldn't save this, who was I? And maybe the hardest question was actually that. After spending years saving everybody else, who was going to save me? Because the truth is, the people who spend their lives rescuing everyone else rarely build a plan for what happens when they're the ones who need rescuing. That's when I started listening to Sarah Jakes every morning. I remember I started listening to one sermon in particular over and over. It was on repeat. The title was Girl, Get Up. And she kept saying it, girl, get up, girl, get up, girl, get up. And every time I'd hear it, I think, but Sarah, you don't know what happened to me. Girl, get up. You don't know what I lost. Girl, get up. And eventually I realized something. Hearing it wasn't enough because at some point I had to listen and make a decision to get off of that couch. And maybe that's where some of you are right now. Not on a blue couch, but at a crossroads. You know something has to change. The question is whether you are willing to decide. But eventually you have to decide. Because until you make a different decision about the difference between being a dependent leader versus leadership dependency, you'll keep hiring from that flawed perspective. You'll keep training from that flawed perspective. You'll keep leading from that flawed perspective. You'll keep growing from that flawed perspective. And here's the danger. Growth can continue for years. Revenue can continue for years. Clients can continue coming for years, but growth without implementation is captivity. Captivity and the Range Rover you bought from a flawed perspective. And one day after enough small things, enough delayed decisions, enough postponed changes, enough conditions that were never created, one day something becomes the straw that eventually breaks the camel's back. I got off of that couch because I decided I wasn't going to let what happened to me be in vain. I decided the internal compliance system that I built wasn't going to die with my agency. I decided that the internal compliance system was more than just that. It was actually a compass to show the next provider the way. And that my tears, my blood and sweat on it was what you needed to see. What you needed to see in order to recognize yourself. Proof that you can't get from any compliance consultant with a suit and a tie. Proof that you need to get from somebody who had a Range Rover moment. Proof that you needed to get from somebody that had a blue couch moment. And if all that pain taught me anything, it was this. The problem isn't that providers don't care. The problem isn't that providers don't know. The problem is that implementation requires conditions. And most organizations never intentionally create them. I was going to use my story, my system, to help other providers. And that's exactly what I did. But something interesting started happening. The more providers I worked with over the last 3 years, the more I realized that implementation was only a part of the story. It was only a piece. Because people don't implement standards in a vacuum. People need conditions. The right conditions create implementation. The wrong conditions make implementation almost impossible. And that's when I realized the real conversation that we need to have isn't just about implementation. It's about the conditions that make implementation possible. When you aren't looking at the right conditions, you think that growth means that you are safe. So tomorrow night, we're going to talk about that. Why success can become one of the most dangerous forms of false reassurance. Because sometimes growth isn't proof you are safe. Sometimes growth is the very thing hiding the risk. So I'm going to drop the link to the provider risk assessment in the chat. And I want you to go ahead and see where you are in your organization. Okay, cousin? I want you to know so that you can take control over the conditions. So have a good night, and I'll see you tomorrow.